Hello everyone, welcome to another AWS video. Now in this episode, let's discuss how can we allow guest users to access our web or mobile applications. Now, why would we want to do that? Because you want to reduce the entry barrier for your potential customers as much as possible. Now, let's imagine you have an online bookstore. I think you would agree with me that you should allow readers from all around the world to visit your site and browse all your books leisurely, and you should only prompt the login screen when they're really ready to buy a book. Now today, most of the modern applications they tend to use these GraphQL APIs at the backend. Now this is because these GraphQL APIs have a lot of benefits over RESTful APIs. For example, both the web and mobile applications can use the same API. And also they have the full control over the data that they want to retrieve from the backend. Now because of that, AWS has introduced this AWS AppSync Managed GraphQL service, which you can use to host your GraphQL APIs. And then you can attach multiple data sources like DynamoDB, Lambda functions, Elasticsearch, and many other data sources as well. Now imagine in this online bookstore use case that you have a book table in a DynamoDB database and you want to allow all your guest users to access these books when they visit your site. So they will see a list of books and they can browse and they can decide whether or not to buy. However, all the requests to these AppSync APIs must be authorized by one of the following authorization types. So that means you cannot just freely or publicly access AWS AppSync API and retrieve the information from the data sources. So you have to make sure that the requests are authorized against Cognito user pool or an API key, IAM or OpenID connect provider. Now the interesting thing is that these AppSync APIs can support multiple authorization types. For example, you can use Cognito user pool authorization and IAM authorization for your AppSync API. Now, out of these four authorization type guys, Cognito user pool is the one that is commonly being used. Now, one of the reason is that Cognito user pool itself is a scalable user directory. And also it supports for user groups. So if your application users belongs to multiple user roles and they require different permissions, you can easily create these Cognito user pool groups and associate these users under those groups and add permission to these groups. And that is really cool. But however guys, user pool authorization does not support for unauthenticated users. For that, you have to either use API key or IAM, Identity and Access Management. So what is API key? So that is nothing but some secret key that you can attach to the headers of the client HTTP requests so that the AppSync can verify that secret key and authorize those requests. Now these API keys has an expiration date. You can use an API key up to 365 days and after that you need to request a new one. Next we have IAM or Identity and Access Management Authorization. In AWS IAM it supports users and roles. So in this case we are going to create an IAM role for unauthenticated users so that they can assume that role and interact with the backend services like AWS AppSync. Now you have to make sure that these IAM roles has limited permissions because these are assumed by unauthenticated users, so it could be anyone. So how can a guest user or an unauthenticated user assume this IAM role? Now have a look at this diagram. Now each user pool has an associated identity pool. Now although user pools cannot have unauthenticated users, Identity pool supports unauthenticated access. That means all the guest users who try to access our application will receive AWS credentials associated with the unauthenticated IAM role that we have assigned to the identity pool. So the guest users can use these AWS credentials to talk to the AppSync API and thereby retrieve the book information. I hope it's clear. If not, don't worry, I will explain more when we are going along with the demo. So in today's demo, I'm going to create an AppSync API that supports for multiple authorization types. I'm going to add Cognito user pool authorization as well as IAM authorization. So our authenticated users, they will be authorized against the user pool, and the guest users, so the unauthenticated users, they will be authorized with IAM. Okay, now let's get started with the demo. Alright guys, so let's use Amplify CLI to provision our resources and configure them. So I'll start by creating an React project with create React app, and we'll call it bookstore. So I'll cd into bookstore folder and open it in Visual Studio Code, and after that let's start configuring our backend resources inside this folder. So inside the integrated terminal, I'm going to use Amplify CLI. First, let me show you the version that I am using, that is 4.37.1. So let's create an Amplify project first. I will do Amplify init. I'll accept the default. So I'll be using one of the pre-configured AWS profile. Now if you want to configure your AWS profile, do Amplify configure. Okay, so the Amplify project is now created. We can start adding our AppSync API. Our AppSync API is going to use two types of authorization. One is Cognito user pool, the other one is IAM. Now to create the Cognito user pool authorization, obviously I need a Cognito user pool, and for IAM authorization, I'm going to need an identity pool. So let's first create this user pool and identity pool, and we can simply achieve it by using the auth category in Amplify. So let me clear the screen. So I'll do Amplify add auth. So now I can do the configuration. So I'm not going to accept the default configuration because it does not include the unauthenticated access permission for identity pool. Thereby, I'm going to use manual configuration. So I'll select that and hit enter, and make sure to pick this option, that is user sign in, sign up with IAM control. Provide a name for this category, and here we can provide a name for our identity pool. So I'll accept the default name, and then it is asking me whether or not I need unauthenticated logins. So in my case, of course I need unauthenticated logins, so I'll select yes and hit enter. Now I don't need a third-party authentication provider, so I will just say no. And next it will ask me to enter a name for the user pool. Now remember, it is going to provision both user pool and identity pool. So I will just accept the default name that it has given, and I can add more configuration pertaining to the user pool. That means how does the user want to log in. So I'll say okay, username is fine, and then it's asking whether or not I need a user pool group. Now in my bookstore application, I would need a group for admins, because admins are allowed to create books to our bookstore. So I'll say yes, and let me give a name for the group. I'll call it admin, and I don't need another group particularly in this context, so I just say no. So then I can sort the user pool groups. So that means if a user belongs to multiple group, which group should be prioritized. So in this case, just one group. I'll just select admin, and then it's asking, do I need this admin query API? Now this will be useful if you really want to manage your users. That means remove the users from the user pool from your front end itself, confirming user signups if they haven't clicked that link in the email. So I'm not going to add any of this to this demo, so I just say no. I don't need MFA as well. I'll select the email-based authentication. So I'll accept the default for the verification subject message. I'm not going to override the default password policy, and I'll just accept the rest. Well, I would need an OAuth flow. That means you can have a hosted UI in Cognito and set up the OAuth flow. And I don't need any Lambda triggers for different authentication steps. Now with that, it is configured. If you want to add more configuration which is not available in the Amplify CLI, of course you can use CDK, and you can also use CDK and Amplify together in the same project as well. But in this case, Amplify CLI does the trick for me. Okay, so now I have configured user pool and identity pool, and I have also enabled unauthenticated access for my identity pool. So behind the scene, guys, it has created this IAM role for unauthenticated users, and when they are logging, it will be assumed, and then it will send the AWS credentials associated with that IAM role. Now I'll show you that IAM role in just a bit. So next, let's start creating our API and configure those user pool authorization and IAM authorization. So let me clear the screen and I'll do Amplify add API. Pick GraphQL and I'll add the default bookstore API. And here I am supposed to pick the default authorization type. Now my default authorization type is Amazon Cognito user pool. That means unless otherwise we'll particularly mention to use IAM authorizer, all other requests will be signed or they will be authorized against a user pool. That's what we need. I'll accept that. And here it's asking me whether or not I need advanced settings for GraphQL API. Of course I need, because I need to set up another authorizer. So I'll say yes. And here it's asking, do I want to add additional auth type? I say yes. And now I can pick which authorizer. So here I'll select IAM and hit space to select and then hit enter. And I'm not going to add conflict detection. I don't have an annotated GraphQL schema. And let's use a template and then create this book schema. Okay, I will go ahead and edit it. And here it has open. Let me take out the integrated terminal. Now I'll call it this type as book. And it's going to use at model directive, thereby it'll create the DynamoDB table and all the CRUD operation in VTL script. And for a book, let's assume we have ID and book title, description, and also price. Now, when I do amplify push, it is going to expand upon this GraphQL schema, and it's going to add all these types like the mutations, queries, subscription, and everything. But thanks to Amplify, we just have to define only this. The next important thing is, guys, we need to add authorization rule for our book type. Now let's imagine our bookstore has admin users, and those are the users who are able to create books inside our bookstore. And everyone else, like all the signed in users or unauthenticated guest users, they can only read the books. So how can we add that authorization rules? Well, in that case, we need to use at auth directive, and inside the parentheses, I can add my rules array. I will add 3 rules. Let me copy paste them. Here we go. Now this has to be lowercase because our group name is simple admin. Now the first rule says that all the users inside this admin group can perform all the operation associated with the book. So what operation does it has? Reading books, creating, updating, delete books. So I haven't added this operation attribute here. Thereby it will automatically allow all the operations. So that's great. So our admin users can then do everything. And next, I'm defining a rule for all my authenticated users. Now, these are the users who signed in with the online bookstore. Maybe they want to buy a book. Now, for those signed in users, I'm allowing the read operation. because although they signed into my application, that doesn't mean they can create books in my bookstore, right? So that's why I'm allowing them only the read operation. And if we think about these two rules, guys, both these two rules use Cognito Authorizer because the admin users and the signed in users are already signed in with a user pool. Thereby, it can use this JWT token that is returned from the user pool. Now, let me show you that. Now, all the users who signed in with the user pool, they will receive this JWT token, and this JWT token will include the group details and all that. So this JWT token will then be sent back to the AppSync, so the AppSync can then evaluate these rules because JWT token includes this group information. Okay, so what about our guest users, guys? For these guest users, we have another rule setup. And here I'm allowing public. That means it is going to either use IAM authorizer or API key authorizer. Now in our application we are using IAM, so that's why I have set the provider to IAM. Otherwise, by default it will use API key. And then I'm allowing only the read operation for all the guest users. Now this will make sure our guest users or the unauthenticated users can request the list of books from our AppSync API. Now I think this is it, guys. I'm not going to configure other types like orders and so on. Let's keep this simple. So I'll take the integrated terminal again and I will do amplify push. So this will configure my user pool, IAM role, and also this AppSync API. So I'll create the code as well in JavaScript and all the mutations and subscriptions so we can consume from the front end, accept the default, and let's execute this. But we are not going to consume it from the React front end, but instead let's log into AWS AppSync console and try to verify these authorization rules. All right, guys. So the AppSync API is now deployed together with the Cognito user pool and identity pool. Now let's view them in AWS. So I'll type Amplify console. So I will open the Amplify console. Okay, here we go. It has opened. Now in the authentication section, guys, you should see our identity pool. Now this is our identity pool and this is our user pool. Now if I view the identity pool in Cognito and I'll click edit identity pool right here. Oh, there's a 500 server error. Has a problem with AWS, I believe. So anyway, that's all right. What I want to show you is that unauthenticated IAM role, but I will show it in the code itself. Let me get back to our code editor. And here inside the Amplify folder, we can see the backend folder, and inside that we can find the API, and inside that there's a bookstore API. So again, open the build folder, and inside the build folder, you should find the CloudFormation template that has been deployed to AWS. Now all the resources that we defined earlier is included in this CloudFormation. Now let me find auth role policy, and here we go. So this is the unauthenticated role policy that is being applied or that will be applied for all the unauthenticated users. I will do a quick formatting and we will see it better. Here we go. So this policy states all the unauthenticated users are allowed to access AppSync API and particularly the getBook query. Do you see this one? So they are allowed to view the books, the get books. Not only that, they are able to access the list books query. Now this is exactly what we need. So our unauthenticated or the guest users can view the books or list books. Okay, so let's get back to our AWS console and I will go back to our Amplify console. And next, let's go to API section. And the API, I can open it in AppSync. And if I go to schema, then I see the entire schema. Now here, this is the main query type. So in the main query type, this is the list book operation that we allowed for unauthenticated users. Now, do you see it is allowed for both AWS IAM as well as AWS Cognito user pool users? Great. So now I will go ahead and create a couple of users in my user pool. So for that, I will go back to authentication. And then this time, instead of identity pool, which is not working for some reason, I will open the Cognito user pool here. So this is it. I'll click users and groups, and let's create two users, admin, and I'll create another user. Let's say Manoj. So two users are created, and I'm going to add this admin user to our admin group. Now, do you see this is already a admin group? So I'll click on this admin group, and I'll click add user, and I'll add the admin user here. Okay, great. So we have two users now, and the admin user belongs to the admin group. So let's go back to our AppSync console, and let's try to run some queries. So I'll go to this queries tab, and then let's first log in with the user pool. So from the drop down, I will select the web client and the username. This is admin. So I'm logging as the admin user. Click login. Okay, then I'm going to go ahead and run this create book mutation. And let's add a couple of fields. Add the book title as book 1, price $20, ID let's say this is 1, and some description, book 1 description. And then let's get back the ID, price, and the title. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and run this mutation. So I'm able to create that book because this is the admin user who is in the admin group, thereby he is able to create books. So let's create another book. This time I'll call it book 2, price 30, and ID 2, book 2 description. Create that one as well. Perfect. Now how about I log in as the other user. So let me click again, web client, username Manoj. So now this user is not part of the admin group. So let's try to create another book. So this time I just add ID and the title, ID 3, title book 3, and we'll get the ID and the title as the return. And here we go. I get that not authorized error message. Now this is exactly what we need. Now let me log out from this and let's try the unauthenticated or the guest user access. So from the drop down, I'm gonna select Identity and Access Management IAM. So let's go ahead and add this query. So we can use both the getBook query and the listBook query. So let's test retrieving the list of books for an unauthenticated user. So I'll select this one and I'm going to get the ID, the title, description, and the price. Let me remove the mutation up here and let's try to run this query. Ideally, I should get some data. And here we go. I got my data. So I'm not logged in as any user, but since we allowed our guest users to assume that unauthenticated role, it allows me to query the data. Now, so far I tested everything using the AppSync console. Now, if you want to use it in your front-end application like your React front-end, then you can easily use Amplify library. Now, this is what I want to show you guys. I hope this has been useful. I'll see you in another video.